We have about 3 minutes to our scheduled departure time right now, so time for using the restroom, getting food and beverages and things of that sort. That has all run out. So, it is now time for everyone's favorite thing, safety announcements. Oh wow, I didn't get a bunch of excitement out of that. What a surprise. Well, anyway, before I do that, I'd like to introduce myself to you. I'm standing here in the middle of the train, white shirt, black vest, waving my hand right now. My name is Trevor. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Okay, I'm going to be your conductor today, and before we depart, we have a few quick safety announcements to go over. So, if there's one part of the spiel you're going to listen to, this is it. First and most important thing, I need everyone to remain seated at all times throughout our journey, because the train may stop at times during our journey, it will stop at times during our journey, and that does not mean stand up. So remain seated at all times unless I say you can stand. It's so important. There's even yellow plaques at the end of each car that say, please remain seated. So, please remain seated because we may come to a very sudden and abrupt stop, even if a wild turkey or rogue mountain biker gets in our way, and I don't want you guys hurting my floor when you fall down. Okay, I'm sorry, that's one of my very few dad jokes for the day, I promise. But in all seriousness, though, I'm actually concerned about your personal safety, so please just don't stand while the train is moving or about to move. Second thing, do not smoke on board this train or up in the woods. We have some 1,000 to 2,000-year-old pieces of lumber up on that hill there. We want to keep them just the way they are right now for future generations to see. So do not smoke on board this train or up in the woods. So third thing is we caution you against reaching out and grabbing the vegetation that grows along the line. The reason for this is there's a lot of vegetation that grows on that hill. Now, this plant that you can touch right here along the side of the train, that is California live oak. Very nice oak, beautiful tree. But there's another type of oak on that hill, and it's called poison oak. And it'll give you a very itchy and uncomfortable 2-week rash as a reminder of your experience here at Roaring Camp today. And we don't want that. We want lots of happy, smiling pictures and good memories to remember your trip today, not memories of screaming children with rashes on the car ride home. So please just don't reach out and grab that vegetation. Your neighbor behind you will appreciate it no matter what type of plant it is, because as the train moves along at a brisk pace going down the hill and you grab that branch and let go of it, it'll spring back and slap your neighbor in the face. And then you have to sit with them for the rest of the run as they seethe in anger, and it will not be a happy experience for either of you. So just don't reach out and grab that vegetation. The final thing, not really a safety announcement, but just something of common courtesy. I'd like everyone to notice they got on a nice clean train today, and that's because everyone on yesterday's trips took their trash with them. I only found a couple pieces of trash on board this train this morning. So keep up the good work and go after what they did and take all that trash off the train with you. Throw it away in one of the many receptacles down here at Roaring Camp or at the top of Bear Mountain. We have 3 more trips after this one today, and we want them to all get on the nice same clean train that you got on today at 11 o'clock, or are going to leave at 11 o'clock anyway. So just please take all that trash off the train with you and keep it nice and clean for everyone. All right, that's it for safety announcements. Pretty quick and painless, huh? So, we're getting our last few people on board. Our engineer's finishing setting retainers, and once he's back on board and we've received clearance from the depot, we'll be out of here. I need everyone to be seated in the benches at this time because we are about to roll. Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, are you ready for a great train ride?
Yep.
Come on, you can do a little better than that. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Here we go. There's that steam whistle you were waiting for, and we're out of here right on the money. So, as we depart Roaring Camp, let's wave at anyone left on the platform there. You guys got the magic trip, and they're still stuck there. As we depart Roaring Camp, I'll draw your attention up to the head end of the train there, that green and orange fire-breathing machine that's about to pull us up the hill. That is engine number 1. Her name is Dixiana, named after the fact she was rescued out of Dixiana, Virginia before coming here to Roaring Camp. Number 1 is what is known as a shay type engine. Now, a shay is named after the inventor of that class of engine, Mr. Ephraim Shay. And shays are a type of geared steam engine. They're very different from a conventional locomotive, and I'll explain what that means in just a moment here. But that particular shay was built by the Lima Locomotive Works of Lima, Ohio in the year 1912. She's 106 years old, still pulling people up and down these mountain grades. Now, shays are what are nicknamed sidewinders. The reason for this is because all of the workings of a shay are on the right-hand side, and because it's a geared locomotive, it kind of winds around. And so you're going to get a great view of the working side of that shay engine on the right here as we go around Schoolhouse Curve. Now, just like any steam locomotive, Dixiana up there has a fire. boiling the water in the boiler to create the steam pressure. Instead of being fueled by coal or wood like a very stereotypical locomotive, Dixiana up there uses recycled motor oil to fuel the fire. Stuff you get out of your car when you change the oil. I do need everyone to be seated in the benches, please. Thank you. Now that oil fire is burning at a temperature of about 2,750 degrees Fahrenheit in that firebox. And that oil fire is boiling the water in the boiler, creating about 200 pounds per square inch of steam pressure. Now this is where a shay differs greatly from a conventional locomotive. They're not like the engines you see in the old Western movies or in the movie The Polar Express, with the big 2 cylinders up in front driving side rods that go to the wheels on the side of the engine, allowing the engine to go very, very fast. Dixiana has a gear reduction system. Its steam pistons are mounted vertically on the right-hand side of the locomotive, going up and down, and they spin a crankshaft that runs the entire length of the right-hand side of the locomotive. Now on that crankshaft are flexible universal joints and sliding square shafts that allow the wheel trucks to pivot on sharp turns. On the wheel trucks themselves, connected to that line shaft, are small little cone-shaped gears that are called pinion gears. Those pinion gears mesh with the ring gears bolted to each wheel on the right-hand side of the locomotive. So, I bet you're all wondering, well, that was a whole lot of mechanical jargon that I just threw at you there. What does all that mean? Well, basically, what that means is that all 8 wheels under that shay locomotive are driven with a 3-to-1 gear reduction. So every 3 strokes of the piston, you're getting 1 wheel rotation. So she's very powerful, very flexible to that line shaft, but it does not go very fast. The top speed of that shay is only about 10 to 15 miles an hour, and will barely hit the low mark that I'm picturing you today. Like driving your car in first gear constantly, basically. But that locomotive up there was primarily used for logging, and most shays were, as a matter of fact. That engine worked at 6 different outfits before coming here to Roaring Camp, but even though the engine was built for logging, the railroad you folks are riding over today was never used for logging. This railroad is a recreation of a narrow gauge logging railroad built specifically for tourism. Now, narrow gauge refers to the distance between the 2 rails being narrower than the American standard gauge of 4 feet 8.5 inches. In this case, this is 3-foot gauge, 3 feet between the rails, and that was the most common form of narrow gauge in North America. Narrow gauge railroads were very versatile at the time due to the fact that the equipment was smaller. As a result, you didn't have to excavate as much dirt to get a narrow gauge railroad through, and the equipment was cheaper to buy, so you could get a logging railroad up and running much more quickly and cost effectively with narrow gauge equipment. But even though this railroad was never used for logging, it's a very authentic recreation of what any logging railroad built between about 1860 and 1940 would have looked like. So as we go up and down this hill today, number 1 will be doing exactly what she was built to do. Instead of hauling logs, however, she's found a new career today, hauling people through the very same old-growth trees she was once used to take to the sawmill. Now, you are lucky today because you have just entered an old-growth redwood forest, and this is one of the very few old-growth redwood forests left in existence. 5% is all that remains of the original old-growth redwood, while the other 95% was logged off right around the turn of the 20th century. Most of the trees you're going to be seeing within this forest today are what are known as Sequoia sempervirens trees. Now in Latin, sempervirens means ever-living. These are the ever-living trees, but they are more commonly referred to as the California coastal redwoods. The average age of these trees is about 700 years old, but in perfect conditions, they can live to be up to about 2,200 years old apiece. This is the tallest species of tree in the world, as a matter of fact. The tallest recorded coastal redwood tree, nicknamed the Hyperion Giant, tops out at just over 380 feet tall. Now, the range in which redwoods grow natively starts about 90 miles south of us on the other side of the Monterey Bay, in a place called Big Sur. That range then works its way all the way up the northern coast of California, getting into Oregon a little ways and stopping. While this range is very, very long, however, these trees will only grow about 8 to 10 miles inland from the coast at any given location. That's because they need to grow within what's called the Pacific Coastal Fog Belt. These trees need that Pacific coastal fog to survive because this forest does not get annual rainfall. From the months of about May until October, not a drop of rain falls, so what happens is when that fog rolls in, the trees have an adaptation that allows that fog to condense on their needles. Now, much of that fog is absorbed through the tree's needles, watering the insides of the trees, while the rest of it condenses into those droplets that get heavy and fall to the forest floor, watering these trees' roots year-round. On some of the driest years, these trees can get up to 40% of their annual watering from the fog alone, and that's pretty remarkable, given that some of the largest of these trees need up to 500 gallons of water a day to survive. Now, right now, our train is crossing over Indian Creek Trestle. Indian Creek Trestle is an all-wooden trestle bridge that stands about 42 feet above the forest floor at its highest point. This trestle is 210 feet long, but more importantly, it holds the distinction of being the sharpest curving railroad bridge in all of North America. Now, as I was mentioning, shay locomotives are built for flexibility and power. That's because all logging railroads had two things in common, regardless of where they were. And that was that they were curvy and they were steep. This is a very good example of how curvy things could have gotten on a logging railroad because we are going around an extremely sharp curve on this bridge right now. But after we get off the bridge and start heading up the side of this canyon here, our train's going to be going up a grade that tops out at just over 8.5%. So what I mean by this is that for every 100 feet our train travels forward, we'll be rising vertically 8.5 feet. Most modern trains of today, your average Amtrak train or modern freight train, they don't go on grades much above 2 to 3%. Anything over that, they just purely will not do it. But here at Roaring Camp, we consider that pretty level. These engines were built to go up grades at 8.5% and even steeper. And just to give you an idea as to how steep that 8.5% grade really is, when Dixiana up there is at the head end of the train at the peak of the grade, the last car of the train here, the rear where I'm standing right now, will be just under 3 stories in vertical height below the locomotive. And that gives you some perspective as to how much vertical height we are about to gain on this tiny little stretch of track on an 8.5% upgrade. Number 1 is not hauling a light load up this hill either. By herself, she weighs 42 tons, but with all of you folks on board this train behind her, that's about another 60 tons of weight behind the locomotive. So, all in all, we are about to haul a better part of 102 tons up this very steep mountain grade, and that is not bad for a 106-year-old machine, if you ask me. So, ladies and gentlemen, you are witnessing right now one of the hardest working steam locomotives in the United States as she battles her way up the canyon here. So as Dixiana makes her flight on this grade, I'm going to come around and collect those tickets from you, so have them ready for me as I come around. Tickets, please, tickets.
Where did he go?
talk about, and that's called Spring Canyon. Spring Canyon was once the site of Brewing Camp's famous corkscrew trestle system. So the way this works, we would have gone left here at this track switch instead of right. And that would have first taken you across the low bridge. The low bridge was about the height of Indian Creek Trestle, or so, straight as an arrow, but once on the other side of that low bridge, the train would have started a 360-degree loop back on landfall on the other side of the canyon. And that loop was on a constant 6% grade. At the end of that loop, the train would have entered onto the high bridge, and that high bridge stood 94 feet above the forest floor at its highest point. And at the end of that high bridge, the train crossed back over the top of itself. So the high bridge crossed over the top of the low bridge, and the train would have made a complete 360-degree corkscrew back on top of itself, 94 feet in the air. Absolutely impressive feat of engineering, and really a spectacular sight. It unfortunately came to a very tragic end on June 27, 1976, when a devastating fire destroyed both of the trestles over a 3-day period. Now, the remains of the low bridge can be seen off to the left of the Spring Canyon sign there, but just up ahead of the engine to either side of the train, you will be able to see the remains of the high bridge. It's about another 2 or 3 car lengths ahead of us. You're going to get a great view of that high bridge in a moment here, because we're going to stop. And the reason that we're going to stop is that in the 6 months that the railroad was closed after that devastating fire, the track crew had to find a new way to get to the top of Bear Mountain. So they elected to build that track that you see off to the right there, and that is the Switchback. We're going to back up that piece of track in just a moment here, and I'll explain a little bit about how it works once we get rolling up it. At this time, though, I do need everyone to remain seated because we're going to be making a couple of quick stops and starts as we ascend the Switchback, and it does get rather bumpy at times. So please remain seated throughout the entire Switchback system. Thank you.
Got it?
You allowed to have one? No,
And that train's gonna go backwards in a second.
So as we get rolling up the Switchback here, I'll explain just a bit about how it works. If you were looking at the Switchback from the top down, it would look like a big Z with tails on the ends of it where the lines come together at the junctions. So our train just came up on the bottom of that Z. Entire train to clear the lower track switch. Once we cleared that switch, I aligned it behind the train, changing our track, and we are now backing up the middle part of the Z, the diagonal line that bridges the 2 parallel lines, which we call the ladder track. Once we get to the top of that ladder track, we'll hit a second junction, get onto another tail track, and once our entire train clears the top switch, our firemen will jump off of the engine, line that switch ahead of the engine, and at that point we'll proceed along the top of the Z in the forward direction the rest of the way to Bear Mountain. So we are zigzagging our way up the side of this hill to bypass those old bridges. But in doing that, we have to ascend the very steep grade that our train has just gotten onto. We are now climbing a 10.5% grade, and that is the steepest narrow gauge railroad grade in the United States.
Because they're switching trains, so basically it's actually very
what happened to the ring I think that's what I get. Like,
Well, we've made it, folks. I'd like to welcome you to Hallelujah Junction. The reason this area is named Hallelujah Junction is because of the fact that back when they were building this switchback in the year 1976, it took them multiple attempts to make it up here the very first time. And when they finally got to the top of this switchback after many, many, many failed attempts, as the story goes, the engineer reached over, he grabbed the radio and yelled, Hallelujah. And the name stuck. So this is Hallelujah Junction. And this name still holds true today, as a matter of fact, because we don't always make it up that switchback on the very first try. Sometimes the engine's wheels will spin out and slip, and then we stall. At that point, we gotta go back down to the bottom of Spring Canyon, build up more steam, and make another run at it. My record amount of attempts is 4 attempts before we finally made it, but we made it today, so hallelujah! That is thanks to the wonderful engine crew up there at the head end of our train. Give them a round of applause. Mr. Doug Deemer, your engineer over there on the right-hand side, and Donnie Sage, your fireman on the left. Now Doug is driving that steam engine, and Donnie's getting that fire as hot as possible to boil the water in the boiler to create the steam pressure. It takes a lot of teamwork between those two gentlemen in order to get that locomotive up that steep of a grade. The switchback here at Roaring Camp really is a testament to how well trained and skilled our engine crews are. This is named after the founder of Roaring Camp, Mr. F. Norman Clark. Norman Clark was born and raised in Los Angeles and was a huge rail fan from a very young age. It is said that he read every book about railroading in the entire Los Angeles library system. He was a very avid reader, but more importantly, he was a fifth-generation railroader. His grandfather worked as a train conductor, and Norman spent a whole lot of time riding around on the back of trains all over the place with his grandpa. Those two had another passion, though, and that was visiting old ghost towns. They did this in the summer months when Norman was on vacation from school, so as you can imagine, Norman had the history bug from quite a young age. From that very young age, Norman had a dream. That dream was to open up a park with a recreation of an 1880s logging town complete with its own railroad. He saw that all of these old steam locomotives were being scrapped and that the once great boom towns were turning into ghost towns. So he wanted to preserve that snapshot of history for future generations to see. Right about the time he started getting serious about this dream, he read an article in a rail fanning magazine about a place called Felton Meadows, where Roaring Camp is located today. So he decided to drive up from Los Angeles and he parked his car. He parked his car down our local amusement park, the Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, and he walked up the Southern Pacific Railroad tracks between Santa Cruz at the beach and Felton. And he came upon the meadow, realizing that was the place he wanted to start his dream. So originally, he approached the SP about selling that line between Santa Cruz and Felton, but they were not interested as they were still running freight trains up here. He instead acquired a 99-year lease on this property and started construction on the railroad you folks are riding over today, which is the Roaring Camp and Big Trees Narrow Gauge Railroad. He started construction on this line in 1958 and was opened to the public in 1963. After that, we started amassing quite a collection of narrow gauge rolling stock and locomotives, starting with Dixiana up there. That was the first engine to ever arrive on property here back in 1962. But even after the narrow gauge had been completed, Norman still wanted that line to Santa Cruz, and he incessantly pestered the SP year after year to sell that line, until they finally conceded in 1985 after some very nasty storms came through this canyon and caused considerable damage to that line between Santa Cruz and Felton. Unfortunately, though, Norman was never able to see his dream of the Santa Cruz Big Trees and Pacific fully realized, because due to his tireless efforts to reopen that line to Santa Cruz in 1985, Norman caught pneumonia, which took his life at the very young age of only 50 years old. And at that time, his dying wish to his wife, Georgiana, was that she continue to run the business for 1 year before deciding what to do with it. Georgiana went above and beyond, however, to preserve her husband's dream and ran Roaring Camp for nearly 30 more years until she passed away only about 3 years ago. And we still miss her very, very dearly to this day. The Clark legacy lives on, though, because Norman and Georgie's daughter, Maylani Clark, now runs Roaring Camp Railroad. Roaring Camp is still a family-operated business, and we owe a huge debt of gratitude to the Clarks, not only for preserving this railroad that they've worked so hard to build, but for preserving the historic steam locomotives that run over it. So in just a few moments, we're going to be pulling into our stop at the top of Bear Mountain. Before we do so, though, have a look off to the left-hand side of the train. What you're going to be looking at is one of our fairy rings of redwood trees up at the top of the hill here, which we call a cathedral grove. Now, the trees in that grove are estimated to be right around 1,000 years old apiece. It's a family circle of redwoods. That particular one that we're passing right now is a very popular wedding spot here at Roaring Camp. But once we get stopped at Bear Mountain here, there will be another cathedral grove of trees you can walk into the middle of. Not this one, but a different one, which I'll point out in just a moment here. Now, as we pull in, I do need everyone to remain seated until we come to a full and complete stop, and we hear one whistle from the engine. That's the sign the brakes are locked up and it's safe to disembark. We'll be getting off on the right-hand side of the train, and once we get off, if you walk up the hill away from the train, towards your left, you'll see a red building. Those are the restroom facilities if you need to use them, but if you continue up the hill, directly across from those restrooms on the right, you'll see a fallen tree and a stump. Make a hard right there, and you'll be standing right in the middle of another one of those cathedral groves of redwood trees, and you can get up close and personal with those redwoods. You're also welcome to go visit the locomotive. Myself and the other 2 crew members on board the train would be happy to answer any questions you may have. We'll be up here 8 to 10 minutes, but come back to the train when you hear 4 whistles. That's the sign we're about to head back for the bottom, and we don't want to leave you up here.
Sorry about that.
How about this? 印度看爸爸，看爸爸，看爸爸假叫，爸爸在哪？
It is a beautiful walk back down if we leave here. Alright, it appears we have everyone back on board. Now, our train's on the top of a turning loop right now, also known as a balloon loop. The reason it's called a balloon loop is it resembles the shape of a balloon. If you start from where you fill the air, that's your junction at the bottom of that balloon loop, and you go all the way around the outside of that balloon and come back to where you fill the air. At that point, your train is facing the other way. So, we passed Westside Junction about a minute or two before coming into Bear Mountain here. Now we're going to go around the backside of the mountain, come back down to Westside Junction. And at that point, our train will be facing the other way, heading back down the same track we came up on. So, if you were sitting on the right-hand side on the way up, you'll get to see what was on the left-hand side on the way down, and vice versa. This is how we turn our train at both ends of the railroad here at Roaring Camp to allow for mostly continuous running, minus that switchback where we have to back up on the way up and down the hill. Alright, so without further ado, we are out of here. Let's all get seated, please. As we depart Bear Mountain, there is going to be a very large cloud of steam on the left-hand side of the train as we pull out of here. Now, that is not steam in the traditional sense. That's actually called a blowdown. That blowdown is actually super compressed water. What happens is when the fireman opens a valve on the cab floor, that water, which is under an immense amount of pressure in that boiler, about 200 pounds per square inch, hits atmospheric pressure. So that water's at a temperature of about 388 degrees, which is far above the boiling point of water. And so when that high-pressured water hits atmospheric pressure, it flashes into steam. It expands to about 1,500 times its original size and creates the steam cloud that you're about to see right now. Or maybe not. Well, in any case, you're going to see a better one at the bottom. Looks like it doesn't have enough water to do it right now, but I'll, point out when it's coming for the bottom. But what you're going to be looking at, more importantly, is that view across the canyon there. Now, that mountain over there and all of the mountains surrounding us were clear-cut by 1900, not a tree left standing over there. Mother Nature brought all of that back on her own, though, through the roots of these old-growth trees. What happens is when the mother tree is cut down or it falls over, it'll send about 6 to 10 new shoots up right around the base of the mother tree called nursing trees that repopulate that forest at a very rapid rate using that old-growth root system. This is how the redwood trees reproduce about 85% of the time, and it's also how you get those fairy rings or cathedral groves like we saw at the top of the mountain. But speaking of redwood roots, take a look above the first car on the right-hand side. You're going to see the root ball of a redwood tree from underneath. That is a perspective that is rarely afforded, and the roots of these trees are quite interesting beyond the fact that they reproduce through them. They only go down about 8 to 12 feet deep. They are very shallow-rooted plants for their large size, and that's because they need to be able to absorb that fog drip that comes off of the tree's needles in the mornings. The roots of these trees, though, can spread out to be about 85 feet wide. They intertwine with all of the neighboring redwood tree roots, giving the trees a support network to continue standing even after they get very, very tall and heavy. The roots of these trees, though, happen to be the oldest part of this forest. As I mentioned, the trees themselves can live to be up to about 2,200 years old apiece. The roots of these trees, however, can live to be just shy of 10,000 years old. That makes them the oldest living organism, all of planet Earth. Now we've officially started our descent back down to Roaring Camp, and about this time I bet you're starting to wonder about the brakes on board this train. So we use a system here called the Westinghouse Automatic Air Braking System, which was introduced to railroading in the year 1873 by Mr. George Westinghouse. You may recognize the name Westinghouse from the realm of household appliances such as washing machines and refrigerators, but the Westinghouse Company in fact got its start making train brakes. Now, before this system was invented, the way in which trains were stopped was by using these steering wheel looking mechanisms that you will see to one end of each car. Now I got my hand on the one in the middle of the train right now. This is called a handbrake. The way this works, we would have had a bunch of brakemen on board the train, and upon getting a whistle signal from the locomotive engineer saying he wanted to stop, those brakemen would have run from car to car, tying down these handbrakes as fast as possible, trying to stop that train. But you gotta remember that most of the cars on railroads in the United States at this time were not open-air passenger cars like you're riding in today, where I can just swing around these steps on the outsides of the cars and walk down those wonderful center aisles there. These were boxcars, standing nearly 15 feet in the air, or cars with logs precariously perched on top of them, so the brakeman's job was extremely dangerous, as they had to run along the tops of these cars at any weather condition and at any speed, trying to tie those handbrakes down. It was such a dangerous endeavor that on average, 10 brakemen died per week on railroads in the United States, making it the second most dangerous occupation of its era, second only to coal mining. But the real catalyst for Westinghouse inventing this air braking system was that he had just gotten out of fighting in the Civil War, and he witnessed a pretty horrific train wreck between two passenger trains of the Schenectady and Troy Railroad. These two trains came on the same track at a station unknowingly and got in a head-on collision. Collision resulted in the deaths of many of the train crew members and passengers on board both of the trains. So upon witnessing this wreck, being an entrepreneur and an inventor himself, Westinghouse thought, how can I make the stopping of trains a whole lot safer and make a little bit of money at the same time? And right about this time, he read an article in the European newspaper about a steam-powered air compressor being used to power the world's first air-powered chisel, more commonly known today as a jackhammer. And he thought, well, if air power could be used to break up rock, it could most certainly be used to stop a train. So he decided to test this theory out. He bought his own test railroad, got a bunch of investors on board with the idea. This test railroad was complete with locomotive cars and all. He mounted an air compressor to the side of the engine. His original design worked in such a way that when you put air into the system, the brakes would apply, and as you released air out of the system, the brakes would release. So it was a one-to-one system, which you now call straight air, and it's very simple to operate, but it comes with one major flaw. That's that if the train cars were to become disconnected en route, all of the air would come rushing out of the system, causing all of the brakes to release. Then you'd have a runaway train on your hands, rolling uncontrollably without brakes. So upon realizing this flaw, Westinghouse went back and reverse engineered the system by putting a very large spring in the air cylinders under each car that actuate the brakes. His new design worked in such a way that when you pressured up the brake pipe to 90 pounds per square inch of air pressure, the brakes were fully released. Then when you release air out of the system by making what's called a reduction, the brakes apply. And the ingenious method of this system is that if the train cars were to become disconnected en route, the flexible rubber hoses between the cars would break apart, causing all of the air to rush out of the system, and then the brakes would all slam on, bringing everything to a grinding halt and saving all of our lives. This is a fail-safe system. It really does work every time, and we owe a huge debt of gratitude to George Westinghouse for inventing it. This system has saved the lives of thousands upon thousands of railroaders and passengers over the last nearly 150 years. And it's still in use on railroads across the world today. So as we pull back into Spring Canyon here, you're going to remember I mentioned that Trestle fire burned for 3 days. That was fueled by the fact that the entire bridge was coated in a product called creosote. basically a tar-like substance that preserves the wood from rotting, but is also extremely flammable. So as a result, the trees in this part of the forest were subjected to that very hot fire for 3 days on end, and you will notice that there's still charring on the bark of many of the larger trees in this part of the forest. You will also note, though, those trees are still alive. And that's another attribute of these ever-living redwood trees, because redwoods have something in them called tannic acid. Tannic acid gives the trees that reddish color that they're named for, but more importantly, it acts as a natural fire retardant. And that, combined with the fact that some of the largest of these trees have bark that's up to 1 foot thick, makes them nearly impervious to fire. Now when a fire does come through here, all of the greenery is burned off these trees, the needles and branches and things of that sort, but the inner core of the tree, the actual live trunk of the tree, is preserved by that protective bark on the outside. And even though those needles are what perform the action of photosynthesis that gives the trees the nutrients it needs to continue growing, that extensive root system under the ground I was talking about just a few moments ago picks up the slack, giving the trees the nutrients they need to survive. And at that point, the trees can resprout all that growth and they come back just as healthy as ever before. Now you will also notice that there are many little small redwood saplings in this part of the forest. That is also as a result of that fire, but more importantly, it illustrates the way in which redwood trees reproduce the other time they reproduce through their roots. The other 15% of the time, however, they reproduce through what are known as redwood cones. Redwood cones are the seed pods of the redwood trees. They're only about the size of your thumb or so, and it takes a fire for these to sprout. What will happen is that fire rolls through here, bursts those cones open, releasing the seeds on the inside, and then the fire clears all this underbrush out, all the dead growth and blackberry bushes you see on the forest floor. That allows light to penetrate through the canopy and hit the forest floor, allowing these seeds to germinate. It's very, very important that these redwoods reproduce through those seeds, because when they reproduce through their roots, they are creating exact genetic replicas of the mother tree. When they reproduce through seeds, however, you're cross-pollinating two redwood trees together. That therefore creates a genetically diverse tree, and that is imperative to the survival of this species, because if a disease were to come through here and wipe most of these trees out, chances are you would have a few trees that were genetically diverse enough that a few of them would be able to withstand the disease and carry the species forward. That's how this species of tree has survived on this planet for nearly 100 million years.
Right here, one? No. I think so.
Steam, right?
Right now, our train is passing through the very first Redwood Forest Preserve ever created. And this forest preserve was created by the Welch family, who still owns this property to this day. Joseph Welch was a San Francisco businessman born here in 1867 with the intention of cutting all these trees down. Back then, if you owned a forest piece of property, that was generally what they did with it. Cut down all the trees, sold off the lumber, made a whole bunch of money, but before he did this, he brought his wife, Anna Welch, to come see the trees. Upon seeing these beautiful redwoods, realizing all of the other old-growth trees were being cut down, Mrs. Welch turned to her husband and said we need to preserve these trees for future generations to see. Had it not been for Anna Welch forcing her husband's hand on this issue, these trees would have been huge debt of gratitude to Anna Welch, really, for preserving this forest, and of course to Joseph Welch for doing the very simple thing and listening to his wife. This in turn created the first instance of ecotourism, and this guy, you remember this before the national park system or anything of that sort, so the idea of coming out into nature as a form of tourism was a very novel idea at this time. The Welches were very successful with this. They built a lodge down in Big Trees where people came from all over the place to see these beautiful trees, but the big issue was getting people over here. There was very little reliable transportation in these mountains at that time until 1880, when the South Pacific Coast Narrow Gauge Railroad was completed. Now, the South Pacific Coast ran from Alameda Point all the way along the east side of the San Francisco Bay, through San Jose and Los Gatos, and then over and under the mountains to Santa Cruz. And I say over and under because at one time there were 9 tunnels between Santa Cruz and Los Gatos, 2 of which were over a mile long, making them the longest tunnels in all of narrow gauge railroading history. But after the horrific 1906 earthquake that destroyed over half of the city of San Francisco and collapsed 2 of the tunnels in that mountain, the line was standard gauged and absorbed into the much larger Southern Pacific Railroad system. And the SP ran a very popular train over this mountain called the Suntan Special. It brought hundreds of thousands of tourists over these hills, not only to see the beautiful trees you're riding through today, but to go down to the beaches in Santa Cruz. Unfortunately, though, as the years wore on, people got used to driving in their automobiles over the recently constructed Highway 17. That line kind of fell by the wayside. In 1940, some very nasty storms came through this canyon, obliterated over a mile of track between Belton here and Los Gatos over the hill. And at that point, the SP decided to cut their losses on that section of the railroad for good and rolled the tracks up the very next year. But this was certainly not the end of the story for the rest of the South Pacific Coast. The section between Santa Cruz and Felton remained for many years as a freight railroad hauling sand out of the sand mines above Roaring Camp at a place called Olympia. That is now part of our Santa Cruz Big Trees and Pacific Railway. You can see those tracks off to the left there, and you can ride on our rendition of the Suntan Special, which we call the Beach Train. Now, please do not grab the passing plants up there in the first car. That's a very good way to get ripped out the side of an open car there. That Santa Cruz Big Trees and Pacific Railway runs from here at Roaring Camp down along the San Lorenzo River through one of the original South Pacific Coast tunnels and then down the middle of the city streets of Santa Cruz to the border. That's a 3-hour round trip with a 1-hour layover. You can the boardwalk end or the Felton end of the line. But if you take the morning trip down from Felton, you can actually spend the entire day down there, like 5 or 6 hours, and come back up on the afternoon trip. Then you get to avoid all that wonderful Santa Cruz traffic and parking our Bay Area natives know and love so much, right? Oh, wow, no resounding yes. What a surprise on that. Now, anyone who's from around here knows the traffic in Santa Cruz is nothing sort of horrendous this time of year, so take the beach train instead. Great way to avoid that traffic and to see a beautiful piece of railroad. So I'm going to jump off, line us into the depot, but have those cameras ready off to the left. Remember that blowdown I was selling you guys on at the top of the hill that actually didn't happen? Well, you're going to get it now. So get those cameras ready off to the left, about 20 seconds after we start up out of the stop. For those of you on the right, don't worry, you will see it without standing. It will be the shot of the day. So get those cameras ready.
Sounds like it's above us. I know that's not true.
Unless it's echoes from this train because it's the exact same whistle.
So, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of our engineer, Mr. Doug Deemer, our fireman, Donnie Sage, myself back here, your conductor, Trevor Park, and everyone here at Roaring Camp, I'd like to thank you so much for coming out and riding with us today. We could not keep this going without your support, ladies and gentlemen. You guys coming out today and riding this train is what keeps history alive here at Roaring Camp. If it wasn't for you, this would all be dead by now. So thank you guys so much for coming out and riding with us today. We really do appreciate it. I need everyone to remain seated until we come to a full and complete stop and we hear one whistle from the engine. That's the sign the brakes are locked up and it's safe to get off the train. So please remain seated until we hear that whistle. Now off to the left there, that trail that crosses over the Big Trees tracks leads to Henry Cowell Redwood State Park, where the oldest and largest trees in this entire forest are located right over there. So check that out. Georgie's Cookhouse, so if you'd like something to eat, as well as the barbecue. Very good food if there's still because and check out our general store. Like a souvenir to remember your train ride today. Got lots of heritage events going on around here, such as Golden Manning the Blacksmith, Marshall's office, things of that sort. And once we get stopped, please do take all that trash off the train with you. We would like our 12:30 passengers to get on the nice same clean train that you got on today at 11 o'clock. So just wait for one more moment until you hear that whistle. And There it is. Welcome back to reality, everyone.